right, so we're live on YouTube.
All right.
And we're going live on Facebook. And we are live.
All right, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Try it again. Shabbat Shalom. There we go.
Shabbat Shalom.
That's better. I think you guys can all hear me, but I don't know how well it comes out of the laptop if I don't turn it on. So, how many of you had a rough week? Anybody? One person had it. 2.5 people.
Yeah.
Probably so out there too.
It's a little rough.
So, you know what? Sometimes we rush and through like checking boxes and things. Even on Shabbat, we can get in the spirit where, yeah, we're not going to work, but we're doing all kinds of things. You know, I got to get here by this time. I got to get there by that time. Oh, we got to hurry now because this is coming up or whatever. And get all wrapped up and busy, right? We got to watch that spirit because, you know, Shabbat is all about rest. And so I just wanted to take a minute and just say rest. Rest. Shabbat. Let go. All the hectic, you know, busyness of life, just let go. And just take a deep breath. Everybody take a deep breath. You know, you can let a lot of stress go just with a few deep breaths sometimes. Sometimes you don't even know that you're stressed out, but when you do that, you feel a lot better afterwards. You ever found that to be true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing, especially today. Because today, you know, is Shabbat, and Shabbat is not a normal day. Today is a holiday. It's a holiday. You know, if it were for COVID-19, you know, we get challah, and we would share the challah, and we have like 2 loaves of challah, because why do we have 2 loaves of challah when we do? And usually we don't here, because we don't want to waste it, because we don't have a lot of people. But, you know, at home, you can get those little tiny loaves at different places. They sell the little tiny ones, so you can bring out 2 and put the rest in the freezer or something, you know, because there's only 2 of us at home. But why is the tradition to have 2 loaves of challah on Shabbat?
Because you're supposed to gather twice as much.
You would gather twice as much on right when the manna was falling. God provides a double portion. And it has to do with, we were talking earlier about how we're not supposed to rely, at one time in history, we're not supposed to rely on Egypt, right? To lean on Egypt for our support. Egypt's like a broken reed, and it would just go right through your hand. That's not going to help anything, right? We're supposed to rely on God for the things that we need. And that's kind of what Shabbat is all about. One of the lessons of Shabbat is we don't have to struggle and strive every minute of every day. We can trust God when He says He wants to take us to take a rest once a week, right, from all that stuff, that He's going to make sure He's going to provide for you. He did it in the wilderness with extra man. We all gathered twice as much, right, the day before. And to honor that double portion that He gives us, that's why we usually have 2 loaves of challah and make it a holiday, right? So just breathe. And remember, and there's something else I wanted to bring up today, because today is a special day for another reason. It's not just a holiday, but it's a holiday too, right? We all know what day it is. It's July 4th, right? Independence Day for the United States. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You know, with it being a holiday, with it being a special day of rest, when you slow down for a little bit and take that rest, you're going to make it. It's okay, right? You can know that you're going to make it, that God is on your side, and He's going to take care of you. You can trust Him to take that break. Freedom. This nation was born out of a desire for freedom. The founders wrote this thing on July 4th. That's why we celebrate July 4th. They wrote, you know which document it was? Declaration. Yes, Declaration of Independence. And how does that declaration start?
We the people.
Yeah. And as part says, right, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, everyone knows this. This is obvious, a fact of life. People, it's self-evident. All men are created equal. Now I'm going to pause there because that's really ridiculed and cut down in our school system today, if you didn't know that. By professors and teachers. Like, how? What do you mean, all people are created equal? That's ridiculous. This guy's born, he's rich. This guy, has a handicap over here. This guy, we're all, no one's equal. Everyone is different. That's not what they're talking about here. See, reading comprehension, if there are any teachers, professors watching, reading comprehension is important. Context, it matters. And so what does he say after this? He said, it says, all that are created equal. So you have to think, well, how are they created equal? They are endowed with certain inalienable rights. That's how. We all have certain rights that we're endowed with by the Creator, by the way. It says that. By the Creator. What kind of rights? Well, they listed some of them, right? Life, liberty, our rights. Our rights. They listed some of those rights, and that's what we're born on. So a government is not the entity that gives you your rights. God gives you your rights. That's what they're saying in the Declaration of Independence. Those rights don't come from the government, they come from God. That's why one of the reasons a lot of people don't like the Declaration of Independence now these days, because of that fact. Some of them can. They do have a little bit of reading comprehension. They won't share that they understand that, but they do. And here's the point to it. A government may honor your basic rights, but it doesn't grant them. Are you with me? It doesn't grant them. Okay, and that's a quote from Josh McDowell. This week, we were reading through the fourth section, of course, the Torah and the writings, the Ketuvim, and the Brit Chadashah. Well, in the Torah, we're reading the section. Actually, we had two sections, right? We had two sections. And we started in Bamidbar 19. Bamidbar, or Numbers 19. And we started to see, in 19 we were looking at like the red heifer and how you get real holy water, right? And people out there, well, you get this water and we say a blessing and it's holy water. Well, God has a prescription for to make some holy water, and you need a red heifer, and the temple needs to be standing, right? And you mix the ashes with some water from the red heifer, and guess what you got? Some holy water that can make you clean, right? It's nothing to do with vampires, but, it is holy water. Okay, so we went to chapter 20, and we saw the death of Miriam. The death of Miriam, and how she was buried. We saw the striking of the rock, right? Adonai told Moshe, he said, because people were complaining they didn't have any water in chapter 20, he said, speak to the rock and they'll have water. But Moshe was all upset with the people. As a leader, they were grumbling all the time. They were always against him, and he finally had enough. And he got all angry and frustrated, and he struck the rock instead. Twice. Which was not following the instructions he had been given. And apparently there was a lack of faith too, we learned from Adonai, because that's why it's told he can't go into the land, because he didn't honor God in front of the people. says he lacked some trust there. Verse 12, it says, because you didn't trust me. How many of you would trust if you heard a little voice in your head? People were grumbling, we want candy bars. If you believe, we don't want any candy bars. You heard a little voice that said, go tap on the wall and candy bars will come out. How many of you would be like, oh, okay. You know, and they're all looking at you. You need to give us candy bars. And you hear the little voice. Would you go to the wall and tap on the? Probably be upset. You want me to bring candy bars to the wall? Man, who knows what you would do, right? So we can't judge Moshe too harshly. We also see in there, though, the death of Aharon. We see the death of Aharon, Aaron. And he's being replaced by one of his sons on the top of a mountain. He goes up the mountain with Moshe and one of his sons, Eleazar. And but those two come down. He doesn't come back down. And we see an attack that the king of Arad, Kenani, one of the Canaanite kings from Arad. Remember that ancient ruins town down in the south of Israel, Arad, right? They have it looks just like the temple in Jerusalem would have looked, archaeologically laid out there. It's very strange. I think that, but it's a smaller scale, but the same layout. Very strange. And the people of Arad, that was from the people of Arad. And they came out and attacked Israel. God delivered Israel from that. And then we had the poisonous snakes, right? And the poisonous snakes come out. And all the people had to do, because they were grumbling again, is to look at the snake. So look at the snake. And they would be healed. They had to trust God. And they had to trust more than God, because God didn't go to each one of them with a little voice. God spoke to their leader, Moshe. So they had to trust Moses, too. Right? And then they came down again, no water, and they're at a place called Be'er, which means well. They said, oh, we have a well. Let's name the place Well. Be'er, right? So they came up with a song, spring up, oh well. Spring to the well, sing to the well, sung by the princes, done by the people's leaders, with the scepter, with their staffs. Spring up, oh well, sing to the well. I changed the words from the other version because those words are from the Bible that I just took. Okay, and then so we see Sihon, the king of the Amori, really. And we see Og, king of Bashan, come against the people of Israel. And there's victory after victory. There's overcoming all these trials, right? And we come up to a place in Balak where we camp on the other side of the Yarden, the Jordan River, from Jericho. With me? Already camped on the other side of Jericho. That's when this takes place. There's a king of Moab. You remember Moab they're actually relatives of Israel. They were from one of Lot's or Lot's daughters. You remember that? Well, the king of Balak got really nervous because he saw this is chapter 22, like verse 2. He got really nervous. He was very upset because there's so many of these people. They're like eating everything, seeing everything. Like their sheep and their oxen are eating all the grass. I mean, if they come into Moab, they're just going to destroy us. All these aliens coming in, if they come into our land, they're going to take up all the resources.
A caravan.
Yeah, really very big caravan of millions. They're going to destroy, they're going to take up all the resources. That can make people nervous. That can make people nervous. And there are different things you can do when you're faced with a situation like that. Well, what he chose to do was to send away to a prophet, a Gentile prophet named Bil'am. And we start looking through the story of Balaam, and we hear different ways that people describe Balaam. false prophet, right? Things like that. Was he a false prophet though? He wasn't a false prophet. He actually talked to Adonai. And you know, it wasn't like a strange thing, was it? He didn't act like when Adonai came to talk to him, he wasn't like, whoa, it really works this time, or something. No.
I think, I'm sorry, I think he talked to Adonai at night because he said to the people that came to talk to him, stay here until tomorrow. So I think that the Lord talked to him at night.
Well, at least that first time, because it may have been a coincidence. That's when they got there, that time. But yeah, more than once it was at night, certainly.
Yes.
But not all the time. We see later when he does go. Well, we're jumping ahead of the story there. So, right? But they come. Balak sends some of his leaders, some of his nobles, to get Bil'am to come and curse Israel, right? Because he's scared for himself and for his people, for their welfare. So he wants this guy to come and curse Israel. God tells him, you're not to go with that. You're not to curse the people because they're blessed. God's saying you can't curse what I've blessed. You can't do that. Don't go with them. So he got up and he told them in the morning, right? And they're like, he sends back more people. And Balaam answers again. He says, even if Balak were to give me his palace filled with silver and gold, I can't go beyond the word of Adonai. Notice it says, Adonai, my God, to do anything great or small. He wasn't part of Israel, was it? He's calling Adonai his God. That's interesting. And then he says, please stay until, here tonight so I can find out what Adonai will say to me again. Anyway, he already had an answer. He couldn't do this. Did you ever get an answer from God, but you didn't like it? So you asked again. Yeah. I wonder why we think that will turn out good.
$1 million question.
Yeah.
Isn't that how they call people crazy?
Try the same thing over and over, expect a different result.
Right.
Part of the lesson in this story of Balaam and Balak is for the servant of God, whether he's Jewish or Gentile. And that is, if you turn against Israel, and people from Israel turn against Israel sometimes. I don't know if you noticed that. A servant of Adonai who turns and attacks Israel will fall from favor. They're no longer serving Adonai. Now that's not, when I say that, if God is judging Israel, it's for a reason. And the prophet has to be truthful about it, right? But if on his own a prophet is turning and cursing Israel, that prophet is in trouble. The prophet's in trouble. God has sworn never to fail Israel, never to let go of Israel completely, right? We see it in Yirmiyahu when the Brit Chadashah is prophesied. The rules of nature itself, if the sun might stop shining, if we could find the edge of the universe and get to the core of the earth, what's the best we've ever done trying to dig to the core of the earth? I know there's a movie, The Core, right? But that's fantasy. What's the farthest we've actually got trying to dig to the center of the earth? A couple miles, I think it is. A couple miles. And there are thousands of miles. And it gets harder as you go. We keep trying to find the edge of the universe. And we keep finding more stuff. Galaxy after galaxy after galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
If we can stop the sun from shining, if we can find the edge of the universe, if we can get to the center of the earth, these sort of things, God says, then maybe I'll think about abandoning Israel. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. That's the point. But here we have Balaam. He's not a fake. He's not shocked. This isn't the first time he's talked with Adonai. But he's not following the will of Adonai. He's obeying, but he's pushing it. He's pushing the limits. How much can I get away with? You know, because there's a lot of money involved right here. I wonder how many people today are servants of Adonai. And they give messages to people from the word of Adonai. But they know that some messages might be more worthwhile to them financially. And so they push the limit. How much can I get away with? So people will be happier. And they'll want to come here instead of somewhere else. How much can I, manipulate the word without going too far to please them?
Mm.
So it's relevant, you see? It's relevant. It's relevant for you too. How many people, if you're trying to reach them, relatives, friends, and you know what sort of expectations they have? You know what kind of things they would expect or want, how they would want God to be. You feel a little pressure sometimes when you're talking to them about to maybe kind of soften a little here or there the way you present God, to maybe not conform, but see how close you can get to what they want. So maybe they'll be more open to listening to you. We need to be faithful. We need to present the word accurately. That should be our prime concern. Right? Uh-oh. Do you know what I'm saying? We need to be looking for the dead center. We need to present the message the way God wants it presented, not trying to please people. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Balaam is on a mission. Servant of God, but he's pushing the envelope. God changes the words of Balaam. He doesn't allow him to say curses. He makes him say blessings on Israel instead. He tries this 4 times. 4 times. May I die as the righteous die. May my end be like theirs. Balak says, you're not cursing them. This isn't what I paid you for. I wonder how many pastors on boards hear their board say to them, that's not the message we want you to give. That's not what we're paying you for. You know, there was a pastor in Canada who was fired from his position because he asked the people to pray for Israel. Scripture tells people to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. It says that believers are grafted into the tree of Israel, not to boast against the natural branches. But his denominations fired him. or even just asking the people to pray for Israel. Adonai opened Balaam's eyes so he could see the Malach of Adonai, an angel, at one point, right? I have come out here to bar your way because you are rushing to oppose me. Because you are rushing to oppose me, Adonai said. He had given him permission to go, but Balaam was rushing to oppose him. Remember, he'd already told him you're not allowed to curse Israel, and he's rushing with the intention of doing it. He's hoping God will change his mind, and that's his longing, because that's what he wants. In verse 8, though, God speaking to him again, how am I to curse those whom God has not cursed? How do I denounce those Adonai has not denounced? As a servant of God, you can't do that. He's struggling with it, but he can't do it. God is not a human who lies or a mortal who changes his mind. When he says something, he will do it. When he makes a promise, he will fulfill it. I'm ordered to bless. When he blesses, I can't reverse it. This is his explanation to Balak. He's like, what are you doing? I'm only doing the only thing I can do. You told me prophesy. That's what I do. Here you go. That's what God said. Blame him. No one has seen guilt in Yaakov. That's quite a statement. Wow. No one has seen guilt in Yaakov or perceived perversity in Israel. Adonai, their God, is with them and acclaimed as king among them. Adonai is king. We say the blessings all the time, right? God who brought them out of Egypt gives the strength of it says here in the CJB, a wild ox. If you look in the language, you're talking about a one-horned ox. If you read in some versions, you might read unicorn, right? So it's a one-horned animal, specifically a one-horned ox. So when you think unicorn in English, you think what? You think this Greek image, this Greek mythological image of the fancy white, horse with spirally horn, right? It's magical, and there's rainbows and everything, right? No, that's not what it's talking about. That's Greek mythology creature. But there is such a thing as one-horned animals, and there are different types. And one of them was an ox. And and oxen are very, very powerful. You see, there's a picture here of Israel as being very powerful, figuratively speaking. An ox, Israel, very powerful like an ox. No magic will work against that. You see, they're like the powerful one-horned ox. Thus, one can't put a spell on Yaakov. No magic will work against Israel. There are people out there now. And remember, you're grafted into Israel now, right? That's what Romans 11 tells you. You're grafted into Israel. And there are people out there who are trying desperately to put spells on you. It was a march. Was it last week? Oh, you told me about it. Satanist marches.
Yeah.
Right? And groups coming together to try to curse, well, all believers, the president in particular, but all believers. They want to curse you. But no one can put a spell on Yaakov. No magic will. And Yaakov is talking about literal Israel. Okay? No magic will work against Israel. It can now be said of Yaakov and Israel, both, what is this that God has done? Now here's a verse that I really like better. This might make Debbie smile in the back. I really like better in the King James Version. This particular. just for the eloquence. What, and I think it was used, was it the guy that invented the phone or something? I think used this line. What had God wrought? Was it the first thing? Yeah. What had God wrought? He's standing amazed, Balaam, looking at Israel from above. It's like a people rising up like a lioness. You don't mess with a lioness. It's not wise. Balaam confronts him again. Didn't I warn you? I must do everything Adonai says. He takes him to different spots so he can see only, maybe you can curse only part of them or something. No, that doesn't work. The Spirit of God. Now this time, the first two times, right, he had made sacrifices and then tried to contact Adonai. Made a bunch of sacrifices and tried to contact him. Now this time it just says, it says something different. There's no sacrifices or anything yet. But the Spirit of God came upon Balaam. And he just had to say this. This is the speech of Balaam, son of Beor, the speech of a man whose eyes have been opened. What is he saying? I get it now. My eyes are open. I get it. The speech of him who hears God's words. God told me this, he's saying. Who sees what Shaddai sees. He's up there looking down at Israel. Who has fallen, yet has open eyes. I was messing up here, but I see it. What does he see? Ma tohu ohalecha Yaakov. How lovely are your tents, Yaakov, and your encampments, Israel. This time he ends what he's hearing from God with, blessed be all who bless you. Cursed be all who curse you. And Balaam blazed with fury. Right? And it wasn't enough. There was a fourth time. And the fourth time he starts talking about the future. Let me tell you what's going to happen to you, Balaam. Let me tell you what's going to happen to you. Hear the speech of him who knows God's word, who knows what Elyon knows, sees what Shaddai sees. I see him. Guess who he's talking about when he says this, ready? I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not soon. A star will step forth from Yaakov. A scepter will arise from Israel. A scepter, what does that stand for? Power, authority, in particular. Because a lot of people have some power, some authority. But who holds a scepter? The king holds the scepter. There's going to be a king who's going to come to Jacob. There's an association of that coming of a king with a star rising. Right? Yeah. Why did the Magi, Daniel goes into exile, Daniel goes into exile much later than this, right? And he becomes what's called a Magi. One of the people who works for the king, an advisor, astrologer, all these different sciences at the time, they're learning. Becomes an advisor, an interpreter of dreams. He's one of the Magi, not just one of, he's not just one of them, but he becomes the leader of the Magi, the leader. And many years after Daniel died and been gone, a star rises over Israel. A star rises. And a group of people called Magi who are still in existence in Babylon, in the courts of Babylon, which is a different place. There's a city of Babylon, but different empire there by then. But the Magi are still there. And they see this star. What makes these Magi? There was a large Jewish community still in that area, by the way. These guys were probably Jewish Magi. Why else? What other Magi would care about a star rising in Jacob proclaiming a new king coming to Israel at that particular time? Now, some of you might think, well, I'm a Gentile and I would care. But you're looking back. You're superimposing what you know now onto that text. Do you see what I'm saying? At that particular time, no one knew about a Messiah coming to save the world. There's no reason for any Gentiles to be saying, oh, look, there's a king thousands of miles away. Even if they were Gentiles, some Gentiles in the court in the Magi, they were Magi, and they were looking, and they said, oh yeah, I remember that prophecy. One of my Jewish buddies was telling me, there's a king over in Judah, right? None of them, if they were sane, would say, well, yeah, it's a new king, so let's pack up our stuff and take the couple 1,000-mile trek through the desert, so we can go check it out. Why? Why? They would have no reason to yet. There was no understanding. There was no besorrowed, no gospels shared to them yet. You see? So these are probably Jewish Magi in the court of Balaam. And they came because they saw a prophecy being fulfilled that came from Bil'am. It came from a Gentile prophet. Israel will do valiantly, but he judges Amalek. Amalek used to be first among the nations, says. And he judges the Kiani, the descendants of Cain. And he even judges ships that would come from the coast of Kittim and subdue Ashur and subdue Eber. Eber is the descendant of, you think Eber, the Veit and the Beit, right? The same letter, but with a Dagesh, another Dagesh. Eber or Eber, some people say, right? And Bereshit, Genesis. His descendants become the Ivrim, or what's Ivrim? I have a couple of Hebrew students who should know that.
Mm-hmm.
Hebrews. Ivrit, Hebrew language, right? But they too will come to destruction, these ships from afar. Balaam got up and left after he says, there's going to be big trouble at the end times. And it's not going to go good for Moab, your country, Balak. The story says he gets up and leaves. And that's all it says here in chapter 24. But we know there's more to that story. How do we know that? We look at Numbers 31:8, and we look at Numbers 31:16. And we learn that before Balaam left, he counseled the people. He counseled Balak. Your paganism, your orgiastic festivals that you use to worship your gods, Israel's protected because they're following the one true God. They're being protected and shielded because they're following the everlasting God and his ways. Now, if you want to hurt them, you need to cut them off from that. And the best way to get it, men, is through women. He knows. And that's why the next couple of chapters, you find a story of a guy named Pinchas, who winds up taking, being exalted by God himself because he not only resists this, but he attacks people and kills a couple people who are involved with this paganistic type of worship of the false gods of the Moabites. So we see what's going on. How a Gentile, a true prophet, can fall. A true prophet can fall. A servant of God can fall. And we see a little bit about what it is, what kind of things they can do to fall. You're servants of God as well. So take note. Don't play games with God. Don't think that you can live your life right, but you can compromise the message that you give to other people. Neighbors, friends, family, when you're trying, for whatever reason, even if you're trying to lead them to God, but you don't want to, you feel a little funny about certain parts. You don't want to give it, straight the way it is from the book. You want to, because they might think it's a little funny or something. So you change the verbiage a little or whatever. No. Be faithful to the word. We look at Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah 7. Looked at chapter 7 through 12, and we see a few things. I'm going to gloss through these a little bit. In chapter 7, you see in verse 18 that people in the nations were worshiping someone called the Queen of Heaven. Now, I don't know if any of you, if that sounds familiar, that title. Does that title sound familiar to any of you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The wife of Nimrod is called the Queen of Heaven. The wife of many of the chief gods in different pagan cultures, also called the Queen of Heaven. There's also someone else called Queen of Heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Miriam, Mary, called the Queen of Heaven. And they were offering to the Queen of Heaven. Who do we worship? Do we worship God alone? Or do we worship God and also people like... I already got an uh-oh. Right, good. Good to hear. Like Peter or something. Anybody pray to Peter in the room? Okay, good. Yeah, good. You don't do that. So, we got this thing with people destroying statues now going on, right? Well, in Rome, when the emperor was supposedly coming to faith after the victory of the Milvian Bridge, which his ark shows nothing about any sign in the sky, but it does have pagan gods on it, by the way. It takes a long time to build an ark, by the way, too. So he could have changed his plans pretty easily, pretty quickly, and described to the person constructing the ark, hey, no, that's not, no pagan gods. Put this sign in the sky instead for me. Didn't happen, right? We have this thing going on with destroying statues. But when this guy supposedly converted, what he did is he took some statues from Greece and had them brought to Rome, and he renamed them. And one of them is Zeus. He renamed the statue of Zeus. He renamed it, did anybody know? Peter. Peter. And it sits in the Vatican today, and millions of people have gone on pilgrimage to Rome. They have seen this statue of Peter, who's really Zeus, or used to be Zeus, in the Vatican. And they go up and they pay homage to Peter. And they kiss Peter's toe, his big toe. Oh, Peter. They kiss his toe, right? Such a wonderful guy. Love Peter. Kiss his toe. The big toe The big toe of Zeus, really, big toe of Peter, is worn off. It's gone
Oh my God.
because of all the kissing of his toe.
No more toes, no more toes.
We don't pray or worship a queen of heaven. We can honor Miriam as Yeshua's mother, and we should. And some people don't do that, right? But we don't worship her. There's a big difference. You with me? All right. Yirmiyahu says, pay attention to what I say, then I will be your God and you will be my people. Pay attention. What is that? What is he saying? Shema. Pay attention to what I say. And then I will be your God and you will be my people. In everything, live according to the way that I order you, so that things will go well for you. That's the message. Like, all the way through. This does not change. He doesn't change his ways. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. In verse 30, the people of Yehuda, there's a very important phrase here. The people of Yehuda have done what is evil. Just 3 words, ready? From my perspective. There's an idea out there today that good and evil don't really exist. Your evil doesn't equal her evil. There are different cultures out there with different concepts of good and evil who've evolved over the years. And who's to say which one is better, this one or that one? Who's to say that what Angie thinks is evil, it really is what's evil, and Kathy's all messed up? We don't have the right to say this sort of thing. It's all subjective. It's all subjective. Right? There's a problem with that. I mean, the general concept is true. You don't decide what's good or evil. And neither do you. Neither do you. Who does? Only one. Only one. The only perspective that matters is God's perspective. When you're reading in this book about something being evil, this is the phrase that what is evil from my perspective. He's the one that decides. He's the one that differentiates good and evil. This is what we talk about when we do Havdalah. Chapter 8, the wise are, in verse 9, the wise are put to shame, alarmed, and trapped. Why? They have rejected the word of Adonai. So what wisdom do they have?
None.
What do we say every week? It's time. There's what, right?
It is a tree of life to those who take hold of it.
And it comes from a place in the Bible. It's talking about, we superimpose it onto the idea of Torah, because what's wiser than Torah? But if you look up that passage, if you Google those words, verse, and Google, type verse in Google and type some of those words, you'll find that it comes from a passage that's talking about wisdom.
It's in Proverbs, isn't it?
So it's proper, because where do you find more or better wisdom than the Torah? It's from God, right? So the wise are put to shame, alarmed and trapped. They have rejected the word of Adonai, which is wisdom. So what wisdom do they have? There's nothing left. Sorry. They should be ashamed, verse 12, for the detestable deeds. But they're not ashamed at all. They don't know how to blush. How many, do you see people blush anymore? When I was young, I don't know, like kids especially, you saw kids blush. You saw people blush. You saw adults blush. If something was wrong and they saw it, they blushed. They're like, shouldn't be seeing that, or shouldn't be saying that, right? They knew what was right and wrong, and they cared about what was right and wrong from his perspective. I can't remember the last time I saw someone blush. They don't know how to blush. Chapter 9, verse 11. Just part of it here. Why has the land perished? And verse 12, Adonai answers, because they abandoned my Torah. It's very simple. Verse 23, and the Hebrew number exists in 24 in the Christian. I am Adonai, practicing grace. This is the Tanakh, by the way. It's not the Brit Chadashah. And here we have this word, grace. I am Adonai, practicing grace, justice, and righteousness in the land. And some people think those three things can't go together. You can't have grace and righteousness and justice. Justice demands consequences when you do something wrong. There's a penalty, there's a consequence. That's justice. I steal your stuff, I should pay a consequence, right?
Yep.
Okay. That would be just. If I didn't, that would be an injustice. How do you get justice and grace at the same time? What is grace? Undeserved, unmerited mercy. How do you get your justice when I took your stuff and I get grace? How does that work? You see?
Through Yeshua.
Yeah, through Yeshua. Exactly. This is written long before Yeshua. But that's still the answer. God knows that that's the plan. And that being his plan, he can say, I am Adonai. I practice grace, and justice, and righteousness in the land. For in these things I take pleasure. This is the nature of Adonai. It does not change. Chapter 10, verse 2, don't learn the way of the nations. Verse 3, the customs of the people are nothing. And here we find part of the song of Moses and the Lamb, by the way, from Revelation. There is none like you, Adonai. You are great, and your name is great and mighty. Who would not fear you, King of the nations? Verse 10, Adonai, God is the true God, the everlasting, the living God, the everlasting King. When we come to verse 21, the shepherds have become stupid. When we're saying shepherds, who is he talking about? Leaders. People are like the sheep, and the shepherds guiding the sheep. The shepherds, the leaders, have become stupid. Why does he describe them as stupid? They have not consulted Adonai. All the problems that were coming on the land, and Jeremiah's writing right before the exile. You know the time frame wise, Jeremiah is right before the exile. Part of it is as the exile is taking place. Jerusalem's destroyed in his lifetime. That's how Lamentations is written. It's written by him. He sees the destruction. The shepherds have become stupid. They have not consulted Adonai. This is why they have not prospered, and all the flocks are scattered. There's a sound coming from the north. Judgment is on its way. Again in chapter 11, verse 4, listen to my voice and carry out all my orders. Then you will be my people, and I will be your God. Verse 20, Adonai Tzebaot, righteous judge, tester of motives and thoughts. I have committed my cause to you. Can you say that? Can you say that? Here's what Adonai says. As for all my evil neighbors who encroach on my heritage, I gave to the people of Israel as their possession. I will uproot them from their own land says one day he'll bring them back. Verse 16, this is 12:16. Then, if they carefully, this is not talking about Jewish people. This is not talking about the people of Israel here. Then, if they will carefully learn my people's ways, swearing by my name, as Adonai lives. I'm saying like this, for the four-letter name of God. Adonai, as Adonai lives, just as they had taught my people to swear by their gods, they will be built up among my people. Sounds like a grafting.
Mm-hmm.
But if they refuse to listen, then I will uproot that nation, uproot and destroy it, says Adonai. God's perspective doesn't change. Micha 5:6 to 6:8. Not going to talk much about this one, but a little bit. Chapter 6, verse 5, my people, just remember what Balak, the king of Moab, had planned, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him. The context is Adonai is talking to his people. He says, stand up and state your case. What have I done to you that you've deserted me, basically? What have I done to you? How have I wearied you? I redeemed you from slavery. Was that wrong? I have redeemed you from slavery. People attacking the Lincoln's Memorial. I redeemed you from slavery. What do you have against me? Just remember what Balak, the king of Moab, had planned. He wanted to destroy you. And what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him, because I did, what's the word? I flipped it upside down. And he blessed you instead. Remember that, what happened there, so that you will understand the saving deeds of Adonai. You in a situation that seems desperate, like there's nothing could help, like in the days of Purim. God can flip it upside down. It doesn't matter what that situation is that you're facing, he can flip it upside down. He's a God who saves, and his arm is not short. What does he demand of you? Verse 8. No more than to act justly, love grace, they're the two together again, and walk in purity, or other versions say, walk humbly with the Lord your God. Do what's right. Be merciful and be humble. We've been looking through the book of Daniel. 7 chapters. Not going to try to cover, right? But what's happening in Daniel? What's the story all about? Faithfulness. A story about being faithful, even in exile. And how much does it matter to some people about what you eat or something, right? These guys are in exile. They could be killed for refusing to eat a pastry. And yet they commit themselves. They commit themselves to not eat things that had been offered to pagan gods, or meats that have been maybe tainted with blood, and they wouldn't know. Say, oh, well, we only want to eat vegetables. Let's see how that works, right? They could have, 4 of them. Then there were 3 of them. They were tested with the fire, right? Bow down and worship this image. That was a sick story, wasn't it? I mean, seriously. So the king has remember, it began with the king having this vision or this dream, and no one could interpret the dream. So a man of God, Daniel, interprets this dream. And the dream is like these four images, the head of which is gold, and there's the silver, then there's the bronze, and there's the iron, right? Which are four different kingdoms. But the head is gold. And instead of getting the image of, hey, these kingdoms are bad. They're going to be destroyed later by the rock, and, you should be worshiping God or something. No, what he gets out of it is, I'm the gold one. I'm the head of gold. That's pretty cool. God said so, even. Right?
Uh-oh.
Something happened.
Yes.
What he gets,
There we go.
There you go.
strange, what he gets is, I'm the gold one. And what does he do with that knowledge? He said, God said, I'm the gold one. I'm going to make a statue of my own. A gold statue. They made this huge gold statue. Everybody needs to bow. What do you think the statue looked like? But Daniel wasn't there, apparently. And the three, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, you know who those are, right? Okay. That's their Hebrew names. Refused to bow to the image to the point where they were thrown into this fire. How many of you might say something like, let's just bow now and we can repent later? Raise your hand. No. Now, I'm not talking about you, of course, but do people think that way? And Daniel, again, with the last one. Daniel. Everyone who hates Daniel. See, a new group will come into town. The Babylonians have been conquered. The Medes and the Persians are there now. And they recognize Daniel and raised him up as one of the leaders under them of the whole nation and everything. And everyone knows about Daniel because they can see his life. They can see the guy doesn't do anything wrong, and he's blessed in everything he does. Why do you suppose that is? How his life was like? He's following the Torah. They can see how he's being blessed, and they can also see that he goes up in his window. How many times? 3 times a day. He opens the window wide so the whole world can see and prays out towards
Jerusalem.
3 times a day to pray. And they use that information to frame him behind his back. They make this weird law. I mean, if I was a king, I'd be like, what? This law that no one can pray to any of their gods or anything or make any requests of anyone but you for 30 days, O king. Okay. Yeah, right. What's the point here? I think I'd be asking, why are you doing this? Well, he doesn't. He signs it into law. And we know from the book of Esther as well, as we see here, anything signed into law by a king of the Medes of the Persians, it cannot be revoked. It is irrevocable. It's another term we like from the Greek Chadashah. The gifts and callings to Israel are irrevocable, and to all others as well. But the context is actually for Israel, irrevocable. But the law is irrevocable. And so immediately after this thing is signed into the law, what do? They go sit outside Daniel's window and wait for him so that they can go bursting into the room. Yeah. And the king is very upset about it. Anyway, they throw him to the lion's den. Why does Daniel, when he hears about this law, the first thing he does is actually go and open his windows and plead for mercy from God and pray towards Jerusalem? Is that the first thing you would do? Faithfulness. Remember, we had the prophet Bil'am, who, he